Hello, and welcome in my little corner of the internet. My name is Jess, and here we read all kinds of stories. Some are true stories, some fiction, and some true stories that we sometimes wish were fiction. We do them all. So if you're into intriguing, dark, and scary tales, it's time to kick back, chill, and relax. If you're new here, welcome. Stay a bit, see if you like it. We'd love to have you. Now tonight's chapter. The Silver Wolf Queen. Chapter 17. Only 3 knocks. No one moved. The sound of the 3 knocks still lingered in the ancient gallery. Soft, measured, patient. Not the pounding of an invading army. Not the desperate cries of someone seeking refuge. Just 3 deliberate knocks. The silence that followed somehow felt louder. Darius glanced around the room. I've got to admit. He swallowed. I'd almost prefer someone trying to smash the doors down than this. No one disagreed. The High King's guardian remained perfectly still. His glowing silver sword rested at his side. Not lowered, not raised, but waiting. The other 6 guardians mirrored him exactly. Even the moon sprites had vanished completely. The gallery, so full of warmth only moments ago, now felt strangely empty, as though every living thing was holding its breath. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came again. Exactly the same. Not louder. Not softer. Whoever stood beyond those enormous silver doors wasn't losing patience. They simply waited. Rowan frowned. They're not trying to force their way in. Cashin slowly shook his head. They never would. Why? Because. His voice had become distant. They were taught better. The keeper turned slowly toward Cashin. You recognize the pattern. Cashin closed his eyes. I remember it. He opened them again. 3 knocks. A pause. Then 3 more. He smiled sadly. It was the greeting of the royal messengers. Aldrin frowned. Messengers. Cashin nodded. They carried treaties. Declarations of peace. Royal decrees. They traveled between the 7 houses. No soldier, he looked toward the great doors, was ever permitted to raise a weapon against them. Corvin folded his arms. That seems naive. Cashin looked at him. It was, but it also prevented wars. The Raven Master considered that. How? Because the moment you kill a messenger, Cashin's expression hardened. You announce to the world that you no longer believe words have value. The gallery fell silent. Even Corvin had no argument. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed once more. Unchanging, patient, almost respectful. The keeper stared at the doors. They're asking permission. Darius blinked. Permission to enter. They could simply open them. No. The keeper smiled faintly. They could, but they won't. Why not? Because these halls belong to the crown. No guest enters without being welcomed. Rowan looked toward the ancient doors. So, he hesitated. Does someone have to invite them in? Every eye slowly turned toward him. Rowan noticed immediately. What? Me? The keeper inclined his head. The invitation belongs to the heir. Rowan sighed quietly. I had a feeling you were going to say that. Darius smiled. I'm starting to notice a pattern. So am I. Before Rowan could speak, Cashin raised a hand. Wait. Everyone looked at him. He searched carefully for the right words. If it truly is who I think it is. He drew a slow breath. Then Rowan deserves to know why I'm afraid. The keeper studied him for several long seconds. Finally, he nodded. You've carried that burden alone for too long. Cashin looked toward the crystal ceiling. His eyes reflected the silver stars above. The royal messengers. He began quietly. Were the finest diplomats the 7 houses ever produced. They ended wars. They settled blood feuds. They convinced kings to lower their swords. A faint smile crossed his face. There was one among them who surpassed them all. Aldrin leaned forward. Who? Cashin closed his eyes. When Silverhold fell, his voice became almost a whisper. She was the last person to leave the queen's side. The gallery became utterly still. Cashin slowly opened his eyes, and she swore. He looked directly at Rowan. That if the rightful heir ever returned, she would be waiting. Silence settled over the room. And outside the great silver doors, no more knocks came. Whoever stood there was still waiting. The silence stretched on. No more knocks came. Whoever stood beyond the great silver doors seemed content to wait, as though time itself meant nothing. Rowan glanced toward the entrance. How long will they wait? The keeper smiled faintly. As long as necessary. A day, if needed. A year, if required. Darius blinked. That seems committed. Cashin gave a quiet laugh. Patience was one of the first lessons every royal messenger learned. And the second? Darius asked. Cashin smiled. How to survive long enough to use it. The keeper slowly walked toward one of the crystal windows. Silver light bathed his weathered face. You've told them about the messengers. He looked at Cashin. But not about her. Cashin became quiet. His gaze drifted to the floor. No, I never could. The keeper nodded in understanding. Perhaps today is finally the day. Cashin drew a slow breath. There were many royal messengers. Hundreds over the centuries. They carried peace between kingdoms. They settled disputes before armies ever marched. They reminded rulers that words were always cheaper than war. He smiled softly. But one messenger became a legend. Not because she spoke the loudest. Not because she carried a sword. Because no one ever lied to her. Rowan frowned. What do you mean? Cashin looked at him. She could hear fear. She could hear grief. And she always knew when someone spoke with a divided heart. Darius scratched his chin. So, she could tell when someone was lying? Cashin shook his head. No, that's much easier. She knew when someone was lying to themselves. Aldrin's eyes widened. I've read stories about someone like that. The White Dove. Cashin smiled. That was one of her names. There were others. The voice of 7 houses. The listener. The Queen's Path. But Liriana simply called her. He paused, and a warmth entered his voice. Her friend. The gallery grew still. Even Corvin listened without interruption. Cashin continued. Before every treaty, the Queen would send her. Before every celebration, the Queen would send her. When famine struck, she was the first to arrive. When plague spread, she stayed after everyone else had fled. The keeper folded his hands behind his back. She once crossed 3 kingdoms during a blizzard. Cashin nodded. To deliver medicine. Not orders. Medicine. Darius smiled to himself. This kingdom really did do things differently. It tried. The keeper answered quietly. It wasn't perfect. But it tried. Rowan found himself staring at the ancient doors. If she was so important, what happened to her? Cashin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to one of the statues lining the gallery. It depicted a young woman offering an olive branch to a kneeling soldier. She refused to leave. His voice had become distant. When Silverhold began to fall, Queen Liriana ordered everyone she loved to flee. The generals argued. The council protested. The guards refused. Cashin smiled sadly. The messenger simply bowed and obeyed. Rowan frowned. Then she left. Cashin slowly shook his head. No. She escorted the survivors to safety. Then, he rested his hand on the statue. She walked back into the city alone. Silence. Why? Rowan whispered. Cashin looked at him. Because someone had to lock the gates. No one breathed. The words painted a picture none of them wanted to imagine. One woman, walking back toward a city already lost, knowing she would almost certainly never leave again. Corvin finally spoke. That's impossible. No, the keeper answered. It was simply brave. A faint smile crossed Cashin's face. She told me something that day. What? Rowan asked. Cashin looked toward the silver doors. She said. He smiled, remembering. If hope survives, then no goodbyes forever. The words lingered in the gallery. Soft, gentle, powerful. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed once more. Exactly 3 knocks. Exactly the same as before. The keeper slowly closed his eyes. His voice was barely a whisper. She always did keep her promises. The final knock faded into silence. Still, no one moved toward the doors. Not even the guardians. This was the first time since Rowan had entered the mountain that it wasn't fear that held everyone in place, but reverence. The keeper slowly walked to the center of the gallery. His silver lantern illuminated the polished floor, casting long shadows behind the ancient statues. I was there the day she left. His voice was so quiet that everyone leaned forward to hear. Cashin lowered his head. So was I. The keeper's eyes remained fixed on the great doors. She wasn't wearing any armor. A faint smile appeared on his lips. She hated armor. Too noisy, she always said. Darius couldn't help smiling. She sounds practical. Cashin laughed softly. Oh, she was. She said armor frightened children. So she wore white. The keeper nodded. A simple white traveling cloak. No jewels. No crown. No weapons. Only a satchel full of letters. Rowan frowned. Letters. Messages that still needed delivering. The keeper smiled sadly. The kingdom was falling, and she was worried people might not receive their replies. For a moment, no one knew whether to laugh or cry. Aldrin shook his head in disbelief. Surely someone tried to stop her. Oh, many did. Cashin smiled at the memory. The queen herself ordered her to leave. And she refused. The keeper chuckled quietly. Politely. Very politely. What did she say? Rowan asked. Cashin's eyes softened. She told the queen. He smiled. Your Majesty, you taught me that promises matter. I'm only following your example. The gallery fell silent. The keeper looked away for a moment. I don't believe Liriana ever found an answer to that. Corvin had listened without speaking. Finally, he asked the question none of the others had. Did she survive? Cashin looked at him for a long time. I don't know. The honesty in his answer surprised everyone. What do you mean you don't know? I watched her disappear through the western gate. She smiled. She waved. And then, he swallowed. I never saw her again. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Not because they had learned she died. Because they hadn't. Hope, however small, still remained. Rowan found himself staring at the enormous silver doors. If she never returned, he spoke almost to himself. Then who keeps knocking? The keeper smiled. That? He looked toward the doors. Is the question that has kept me awake for centuries. Darius frowned. Hold on. Everyone looked at him. I've been thinking. Cashin grinned. That usually worries me. It should. Darius folded his arms. If this messenger disappeared 1,000 years ago, and if someone outside is using her greeting, then one of two things is true. He held up a finger. Either she's somehow still alive? He raised a second. Or someone wants us to believe she is. The keeper nodded slowly. A very wise observation. So, Darius smiled. I do have the occasional useful thought. Don't become unbearable, Rowan replied. I'll do my best. For the first time in several minutes, laughter returned to the gallery. Even the guardians seemed less rigid. Only Cashin remained troubled. The smile faded from his face almost immediately. There is a third possibility. The room grew quiet again. What is it? Rowan asked. Cashin stared at the silver doors. If she fulfilled her promise. His voice dropped to little more than a whisper. Then whoever stands outside isn't the messenger. Every eye turned toward him. Cashin slowly closed his eyes. They're the message itself. No one had time to ask what he meant. Without warning, a gentle gust of warm air swept through the gallery. The silver lantern flickered. The crystal windows began to glow brighter. And from the other side of the great doors, a woman's voice began to sing. Softly, beautifully, in a language no one present understood. Except the keeper. Tears filled his ancient eyes. He whispered only 2 words. The lullaby. The song drifted through the silver doors like a gentle breeze. No one understood the words, yet somehow, everyone understood the feeling. It carried warmth. Safety. Something that feels like home. The melody wrapped itself around the ancient gallery, softening the sharp edges of stone and steel alike. The moon sprites slowly emerged from the crystal ceiling. At first, one by one. Then dozens. Instead of hiding, they danced. Tiny silver lights floated through the air, circling lazily above the guardians' helmets. Even the ancient warriors remained perfectly still. Listening. The keeper had closed his eyes. A single tear rolled down his weathered cheek. I never thought I would hear it again. His voice trembled. Rowan stepped beside him. What is it? The old man smiled through his tears. A lullaby. My mother used to sing it. He let out a quiet laugh. So did my grandmother. And hers before that. He looked toward the great doors. It was older than the kingdom itself. Cashin remained motionless. You remember the words? The keeper nodded. Every one. Can you understand them? I can. What did they say? The old man was silent for a long moment. Then, almost reverently, he translated. Sleep, little wolf. The stars are keeping watch. When the night has passed, you will find your way home. The gallery fell silent. Rowan felt something stir deep inside him. Not a memory. More like recognition. As though he'd heard those words long ago in a dream he could no longer recall. Aldrin spoke quietly. Do all children of the Silver Kingdom know that song? They did. The keeper smiled. It wasn't reserved for princes or queens. Every child, rich or poor, farmer or noble, they all fell asleep to the same melody. Darius folded his arms. I like that. No child was born more important than another. The keeper nodded. That was Liriana's decree. If a kingdom teaches its children that they are different, they will spend the rest of their lives believing some are worth more than others. He looked around the gallery. Corvin lowered his eyes. Malachar had taught the exact opposite. Strength above weakness. Power above compassion. He suddenly realized. The Silver Kingdom hadn't fallen because it was weak. It had been destroyed because it was different. The singing continued. Gentle. Patient. Never rising above a whisper. Then, it stopped. Not abruptly. It simply faded. Like the last note of a music box winding down. The silence that followed felt almost sacred. No one wanted to break it. Finally, 3 soft taps echoed against the silver doors. Not knocks. More like a reminder. The keeper drew a slow breath. They're asking again. Rowan looked at him. Can we answer? The keeper smiled. Yes, but understand this. His expression became serious once more. Once these doors are opened, there will be no closing them again. Darius frowned. That sounds unnecessarily dramatic. Cashin shook his head. It isn't. The moment those doors open, the past walks into the present. The keeper slowly turned toward Rowan. For several moments, he simply looked at him. Not as a king, not as an heir. Simply, as a young man standing at the edge of a life he had never asked for. I cannot make this choice for you, he said quietly. Nor would I. The invitation belongs to the heir. Rowan looked toward the towering silver doors. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. Behind those doors waited answers. Perhaps hope. Perhaps heartbreak. Perhaps both. He glanced at Darius, and the big warrior gave him an encouraging nod. Corvin said nothing, but for the first time since Rowan had met him, the Raven Master bowed his head. Not to a king. To a man he had chosen to follow. Rowan looked back at the keeper. What do I say? A gentle smile spread across the old man's face. The same words every Ashcroft has spoken for nearly 1,000 years. The keeper stepped aside. The great silver doors stood waiting. The entire mountain seemed to fall silent, waiting for Rowan's voice. Rowan stood before the great silver doors. His heart pounded so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. The polished metal towered above him, covered in thousands of tiny carvings. Wolves, stars, trees, children playing beside rivers, families gathered around fires. Not scenes of conquest, scenes of life. He slowly reached out, resting his palm against the cool silver. The metal felt strangely warm beneath his hand, as though it recognized him. Behind him, the gallery remained utterly silent. No one dared interrupt the moment. The keeper's voice came softly. You needn't speak loudly. The mountain hears even a whisper. Rowan nodded. He wasn't sure why, but the words came naturally, as though they had been waiting inside him all along. I welcome those who come in peace. His voice echoed gently through the gallery. You enter not as strangers. He paused, but as honored guests. The silver beneath his hand shimmered. Ancient runes hidden within the doors slowly awakened. Soft light traced every carved line. Then Rowan finished. My home is your home, the mountain answered. A deep, gentle hum spread through the walls. The moon sprites burst into the air, circling joyfully around the chamber. One landed on Rowan's shoulder. Another perched atop the High King's helmet. Even the ancient guardian remained perfectly still as the tiny creature chirped happily. Darius grinned. "I think that's a good sign." "So do I," the keeper whispered. A sound like distant bells echoed through the mountain. Not loud, not commanding, welcoming. The great silver doors trembled. Then, slowly, they began to open. No grinding stone, no screeching hinges, only silence. The doors moved as smoothly as though they had been opened yesterday. A beam of warm golden light spilled into the gallery, and everyone instinctively shielded their eyes. When Rowan's vision adjusted, he saw only a single figure standing beyond the threshold. A woman. She wore a long white traveling cloak embroidered with silver thread. The hood covered much of her face. Her hands rested calmly before her. She carried no sword, no shield, only an old leather satchel hanging from one shoulder. Exactly as Cashin had described. The messenger, or someone who wished to be seen as one. The woman didn't step inside. She remained beyond the threshold, waiting, respecting the ancient custom. Her voice was warm, gentle. "May I enter?" The keeper's eyes filled with tears once more. "The old ways," he whispered. "They haven't been forgotten." Rowan looked toward him. The keeper simply nodded. The choice was still his. Rowan smiled. "You are welcome here." The woman bowed deeply. "Thank you." Only then did she cross the threshold. The instant her foot touched the silver floor, every crystal window in the gallery blazed with brilliant light. The statues surrounding them seemed almost alive. The moon sprites filled the air, singing tiny musical notes that sounded like laughter. Even the 7 guardians lowered their weapons. Not because they had been ordered to, because they recognized her. One by one, each ancient warrior knelt. The woman slowly lowered her hood. A collective breath swept through the gallery. She wasn't young, nor was she ancient. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, braided neatly over one shoulder. Fine lines framed kind blue eyes that seemed to hold both joy and immeasurable sorrow. She looked ordinary, until she smiled. There was something about that smile. Something that made Rowan feel as though he'd known her all his life. She looked at him for a long moment, then reached into the worn leather satchel. Carefully, almost reverently, she withdrew a single sealed letter. The parchment had yellowed with age. The silver wax seal upon it remained perfectly intact. Stamped into the wax was the crest of a wolf surrounded by 7 stars. The woman stepped forward, holding the letter with both hands. "This," she said softly, "was entrusted to me." Her eyes never left Rowan's. "To be delivered to the last heir of House Ashcroft." A tear escaped down her cheek. The gallery fell completely silent. The woman offered him the letter. "It is from your father." And that's where we'll leave chapter 17. Sometimes, the loudest moments in a story aren't battles. They're the quiet ones. 3 gentle knocks. An ancient lullaby. A promise remembered after 1,000 years. But the greatest surprise wasn't the messenger herself. It was the letter she carried, right? Protected across 1,000 years. Never opened. Never lost. Waiting for one person. The last heir of House Ashcroft. A letter from Rowan's father. How's that possible? What could it possibly contain? And why was it worth preserving for centuries? Those answers await us in the next chapter. If you're enjoying The Silver Wolf Queen, please subscribe and join us for the next part of Rowan's journey. This story has grown chapter by chapter because of this incredible community. Thank you for spending your time here with me. Until next time, be blessed and stay safe out there.